all so much for coming out and joining us this beautiful Friday afternoon. And thank you for joining us here at Blue October Public House here in Granite Falls. I know many of you, it's so good to see some familiar faces, old friends, new friends. My name is Eric Halstead. I'm the Director of Rural Cooperative Energy at CURE. And I am really excited to introduce our guest speaker, Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon. Secretary Simon, we truly appreciate you making the trip out here to Western Minnesota, and your visit continues to demonstrate your commitment to advancing democratic participation and voter access across Minnesota. So thank you for your commitment to local engagement and community dialogue. For those of you who may not be familiar with CURE, who don't know us well, we've been around for just about 30 years with a focus on local environmental issues. We've really expanded what we work on over the last decade. Our team has grown from 5 to 15 staff, and we've really never been busier. We've celebrated a lot of successes over the past few years, from historic national investments in rural electrification in the Inflation Reduction Act's New Era program, to local level wins against extractive industries. Our current campaigns include the no carbon pipelines, protecting forests in northern Minnesota, and continuing the crucial work to safeguard our waters. But what has always been at the root of CURE's work and our vision is a healthy, active, and connected rural Minnesota. We believe that strengthening rural democracy is a key to achieving that. So, one of our key bodies of work is the Rural Democracy Project, empowering rural communities to have a stronger voice in politics. We know that when rural communities are engaged, we have a lot of power. We all deserve clean water, clean air, and affordable, reliable energy resources. We all deserve a sustainable climate. We also deserve politics that consider the unique circumstances of living in a rural area so that policies can make sense for our communities. A decarbonized future must include rural voices, and let's face it, real effective change won't happen without rural support. This brings us to the important work of Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon. He's been an instrumental voice in making sure Minnesota leads the nation in voter turnout, ranking #1 in 3 of the last 4 years. Secretary Simon's work to expand voting access, ensure fairness in our elections, and streamlining services are essential parts of sustaining our democracy. This event is a great opportunity to learn more about how his work impacts us here in rural Minnesota. Now, I'm excited to hand things over to Secretary Simon, who will be discussing some critical issues affecting our elections, including threats posed by misinformation. After Secretary Simon's presentation, we'll open the floor for a few questions. I'll come around and identify you. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Steve Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. Anyone who had a hand in this, raise your hand if you had any hand in planning this event. Eric, raise your hand. Thank you so much. Really, really grateful to you and to your work. I want to thank Lunos for this opportunity to be here as well. And I often tell people, and it's true, this is the best part of my job, right here. Right here. It took me about 5 minutes in this office, in this job, to figure out that the worst thing anyone in this job could do, me or anyone else, is just sit behind a desk and say all the time. Just sit in that bubble. It's the most toxic, counterproductive thing you could do. We got a big state. We got 5.7 billion people. We've got 87 counties. You got to get out there. What I've discovered, including today specifically, is the best ideas come from all over Minnesota. All over. I was in a meeting earlier today, I won't discuss the specifics, where someone told me an idea I had never heard of. No one had ever suggested this idea to me ever before anywhere. And I would never have had that insight and that idea unless I had had that meeting and gotten out of the capital bubble and the metro bubble. So this is my 9th 87 county tour, and I'm going to keep on doing it as long as I live and breathe and have this job. So I really thank you all for being here. You may have heard we have an election coming up. I don't know if you heard that. 60 days, folks. That's it. 6-0. 60 days. It's going to really creep up on us. It's not some thing way off into the future. It's right here at our doorstep, right? And we all know that. We feel it. It's going to be an intense election. There's no question about it. But in our office, and with my job, and with our folks, this is really crunch time, right? We're in the tunnel right now. And that's a good thing. You know, we oversee the Minnesota election system. That's our job. But some of you, just to level set here a little bit, let's talk about duties and responsibilities, because I think that's important, just to level set here. So we oversee the Minnesota election system. We have a lot of duties and responsibilities, but here's what we don't do. Here's what we have never done and probably never will do. We don't count votes, ever. We don't lay a finger on anyone's ballot, ever. That all happens at the local level. It happens in townships, and cities, and counties, in over 3,000 places across Minnesota. That's intentional. That's by design. The idea is to have it spread out and decentralized. There's no one pinch point. There's no one delay point, right? It's everyone. It's the whole community doing the counting. And the people doing the counting more often than not are your friends and neighbors. They're the ones doing it. So we don't do that. So what do we do? Well, we provide legal advice. We provide policy advice. We certify all the elections equipment. After the election, we do post-election audits and reviews. And of course, we work very closely with the legislature and with our federal partners in Washington, D.C. to get us the best possible system, to tweak and to change and to reform and make sure we're getting that balance correct in Minnesota. So I like to say that I and we are in the democracy business. And it is one heck of a time to be in the democracy business. In case you haven't noticed, it is going to be intense. It already is. There's no problem with that, okay? There's no problem with elections being intense. Heck, especially a presidential election. It's always going to be intense. It's going to be especially intense when, like this year, people have very strong opinions about the candidates, right? They inspire very strong feelings. How's that for diplomatic, right? Strong feelings of like, strong feelings of dislike, we're going to see that. That's okay. Another thing adding to the intensity is that this is perceived as a very close election. That makes it more intense than an election where you think, wow, you know, I care about the candidates a lot. I'm really pumped up about one, or I really dislike one, but it's going to be 65-35. No, this is perceived at the top of the ticket as a very, very close election. And so that could go in a good and positive and constructive way. It could go in another way. We don't want it to go the other way. So what I've been saying, and what I'll say here too, is for the next 60 plus days, because we don't know if it's going to be over in 60, right? For the next 60 plus days, I wish for two things. Two things. If I could right here wave a magic wand in front of you, I would wish for two things. You know what they are? High turnout and low drama. That's what I want. High turnout and low drama. Now, when I talk about low drama, I don't mean low energy. I don't mean low enthusiasm or passion. That's not what I mean. When I mean low drama, I mean no more January 6th, no more violence or threats of political violence. And look, it's up. Every American has the courthouse door open to them. If any American has a problem with the certification of election, or suspects or knows or think they know that there was a problem, or there was misconduct or illegal stuff going on, that's fine. Bring your evidence, bring your witnesses, do your testimony, go to court. That's where we resolve that stuff. But when the last court has issued the last ruling, we have to be done. That's it. That's the finish line. And after that point, all of us as Americans have to get our arms around and accept the result, even if it didn't go the way we want. Go to court, do your appeals, exhaust that whole process, spin the whole thing out. But when that's done, we're done. That's what I mean by low drama, okay? So let's talk about both of those things briefly. And by the way, I want to leave plenty of time for a conversation here. High turnout, first item on my wish list. All right, now this is Minnesota. And in Minnesota, we love to vote, right? Regardless of zip code, regardless of background, we love it. We're good at it. We take it very seriously. You heard in the introduction, 3 out of the last 4 elections, Minnesota #1 in voter turnout in America. And our goal for the next 60 days is to get back to that top slot. We want to be #1 again. We have a reputation to uphold, but it's more than just sort of lighthearted competitiveness. It's important that everyone in Minnesota who's eligible to vote has the information needed to vote, and I hope that they will vote. Now, we don't have mandatory voting in this country. Some do. Australia, Brazil, a few other countries where you've got to vote or you get fined like a parking ticket. We don't. So that adds an extra challenge because the right to vote is also the right not to vote. But I do hope that people use that right and that they vote, and that every eligible Minnesotan will get in the game, they will stand up, they will step up, and they will be a voter. We've got a good history. There's a reason why we're #1 most years, not just 3 out of the last 4, but in most years going back decades, we're either #1 or 2 or 3 or 4, we're in that top flight group. And there are a lot of explanations, but surely one really, really big one is we've had really good laws on the books in Minnesota. Really good laws over the last 5 or so decades. Some of them put there by Democrats, some of them put there by the Republicans. It's a blend, it's a mix. But overall, it's been a really good mix. Balancing access and security. Those are the 2 main things you always want to balance in any election system. Access and security, and I think we've done that really well in Minnesota. Stuff we've had for a long time. It's been over 50 years since we adopted same-day or election day voter registration. That's a big deal. We were one of the first states in the country to do that. Heck, still today, we're one of only 15, 16 states, 50 years later, to have it. And it means what it sounds like. You can go into your polling place on game day, on election day. Let's say you've never registered or you need to change it, name change, or you moved, or whatever. You can do that in Minnesota. That resolves so many problems. That's what I mean. Or the fact that in Minnesota, any one of us can vote from home. You don't have to have a special reason or a note from a doctor or anything. Any one of us can vote from our couch, vote from our kitchen table, and that has really saved us in some tough spots. In COVID, that's arguably what saved the 2020 COVID election. We were #1 in the country, and I'm convinced it was because so many Minnesotans during that really difficult time, challenging time, scary time for a lot of people, they were able to vote from home. And so we got through that stress test. I would say we aced that stress test in 2020 because of that law. I don't mind telling you, that was my bill when I was in the legislature. I'm very proud of that. That was during my last term. So the idea that anyone in Minnesota who wants to and who's eligible to vote can vote from home. You don't have to go to a polling place. But last year, you may have heard, we added a new series of reforms in Minnesota that is going to put us in an even better place when it comes to our elections. Some new laws that are really going to put us in a good position over the next 50 years. And by the way, let me just tick off a couple of them or so. And every single one of these, every last one, is nonpartisan in origin and in effect. Which is another way to put that is, these are done in red states, multiple blue states, multiple purple states. There's no political tilt here. We are not the pioneer. We are not the first. Many states have done these things. Starting with, one of the things that after 20 years of debate, the legislature did was restore the freedom to vote for people who have left prison behind. They've done their time. They've done all of their time. Someone, a judge or a jury, has said, yeah, this person's good enough, safe enough, worthy enough to be out. And now they got that freedom to vote back. That's one. We now have automatic voter registration, which basically is just an add-on to something we've had for 30 years. For 30 plus years, we've had a motor voter law where if you go and get or renew a driver's license, you could check a box saying, hey, yeah, could you please also register me to vote? That we've had for 30 years. Now we just added to that no, instead of having to check the box, if you are otherwise eligible, that's the key thing. You've shown proof of citizenship. You are a resident. You are over 18. If those things are true, then you can be put in a pile to be automatically registered to vote. And you can always say no. You can always opt out. You get a card in the mail. You can do it that way. You can call in and say no. You can email in and say no. But this is a way not only to get more access, but really strengthen our voting rolls, because it means we get people in the system a lot earlier, months earlier than we otherwise would, so we can do the screening and the filtering and all that. So that's another example. We got pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. That's huge. Getting high school students to think of themselves as voters before they even are voters. And that's important, because if you can get a young person to vote that first time they're eligible at 18, 19, 20, or whatever, we know they're much more likely to make it a lifelong habit. So this is a good thing. I went to 33 high schools this last year, 33. And there's a real excitement about this, that kids can get in line to register to vote. They're not actually registering, but they can get in line to do it starting at age 16, which is a good thing. So those are some of the things that have strengthened our laws, which means the number one part of my wish. I had two parts to my wish. The first part was high turnout. Minnesota's a good bet to have really high turnout. I hope we get to number one. Even if we don't, we're going to be among the very top. And in part, it's because we've got good laws. But what about the second one? The second part of my wish. I said I wanted two things. High turnout, low drama. What about low drama? What are the odds of that? It's kind of up in the air. That's up to all of us. And people not in this group as well. People all over America to make sure we channel the passion, we channel the energy and the intensity in a positive direction and not in a negative or a disruptive sort of direction. And let me just tell you that from where I stand, the big challenge that we face, probably the number one challenge we face for our democracy in the country and in Minnesota, is this sort of wave or cloud of disinformation about our election system. It's a problem. It's a real, real problem. And by the way, let me just say, when I talk about disinformation, I'm not talking about disagreement. Those are two very different things. Disagreeing is what we do in America. Disagreeing is what you do in a democracy. Someone wants to disagree with me or criticize me or my positions or my performance in the job or anything. That's what we do. That's what we do and should do. That is welcome, that is normal, that is natural. I don't mean disagreeing or criticizing the election system. That's not disinformation. But disinformation is the intentional spread of knowingly false information about what the system is, what it actually is, not what it ought to be. What it ought to be is always up for grabs, up for debate. Of course, that's what we talk about and argue about. What laws should we ditch, what laws should we add, whatever, right? That's what we do. But let me give you an example that I've given a number of times. Remember at the beginning I said we don't count votes, right? That's a basic part of this job. We don't count votes. That happens in townships, cities, and counties all over Minnesota. We don't touch people's ballots. We just report what other people report to us about their counts, right? But it wouldn't take you longer than 60 seconds right now if you went online and did a creative Google search. It would not take you very long to see people saying and alleging that I, and not just me, but colleagues across the country, are in back rooms here on day minus 60, quietly scheming and plotting with our secret algorithms to boost the turnout or the vote numbers for the candidates we like and to depress the numbers for the candidates that we don't like. That's not what we do. That's not a difference of opinion. That's not what, it's not someone saying I'm bad at my job or I'm not doing something right or we should add this law or subtract that law. That's just a total lie. I mean, because we don't even do that. That's the kind of thing I need, and it's a problem. And then when you add to that stuff like artificial intelligence, a hot topic, right? Then it becomes something really, really serious. And by the way, with artificial intelligence, my own view is that's not so much a new problem as it is a new way to magnify the old, long-time problem. I mean, there was election disinformation in George Washington's time. It's nothing new to try to trick voters into doing something or not doing something. But now it's just easier to do, right? And the example I sometimes give is, I remember a few years ago, I saw a flyer, a copy of a flyer, good old-fashioned Xerox paper flyer that we all know about. And this was a copy of a flyer that had been put in doors, neighborhood doors, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, before the 2000 election. So 24 years ago, Gore versus Bush, remember that, 24 years ago? And this flyer said basically this. It said, hey folks, remember, just a reminder, neighbors, election coming up here pretty soon. Remember, if your last name is A through L, you vote on Tuesday. If it's M through Z, you vote on Wednesday. Just a word to the wise, right? Basically, that's what he said. Now, I have no idea, as I stand here, how many people got fooled by that in 2000. Was it 0? Was it 1? Was it 100? Was it 1,000? I have no idea. But now fast forward 24 years. And now imagine that same attempt to misdirect and mislead. And now it's not a good old-fashioned paper flyer. Now it's a deepfake video of the mayor of Milwaukee, or a deepfake video of a popular athlete or faith leader or business leader or whoever it is, right? It's just easier to do. It's not a new problem. It's a new way to supercharge an old problem. And so all of this falls under the umbrella of disinformation or misinformation. And the distinction there to me anyway is disinformation is the intentional stuff. Misinformation is just an honest mistake, but it's still bad information. And on the misinformation front, we had a recent fresh example here in Minnesota. Maybe you read about it. I sort of got sucked into the swirl on that one. So right after President Biden decided and announced that he wasn't running for re-election, immediately afterwards, in the days after, we got word that there was a particular tool out there owned and operated by X, formerly known as Twitter. And this was a tool, this was a search assistant, kind of a chat bot, as they call it, meaning you ask it a question and it spits out an answer. And it's supposed to get the answer right. And it spit out the wrong answer on what the law was in Minnesota about whether or not you could substitute the nominees. Could Vice President Harris be substituted as the Democratic nominee for Joe Biden? And as to Minnesota and 8 other states, so 9 states total, this tool, this chatbot, this X thing, got it wrong. It said the exact opposite of what was right. It said, no, it's closed, no substitutions, no changes. President Biden's going to have to remain on the ballot. That's not true. It's never been true. So a bunch of us reached out, or we reached out through our national association, I should say, to the company, to X, to Elon Musk's company. And we said, your tool got it wrong. And their initial response was what I call kind of a shoulder shrug. It was, well, there's a disclaimer on there. We're coming out with a new version anyway soon. This shouldn't be a real problem. It's only July. No big deal. And we were really distressed and concerned by that. So a bunch of us, secretaries of state, we wrote a letter to the leadership of X, to Elon Musk, to let them know that this didn't sit too well with us. And that we really needed them to not only acknowledge the error and fix the error, but we even had an idea. Instead of just shaking our fists at the sky at the problem, we had a constructive idea. And the idea was, hey, X, why don't you do what one of your competitors has already agreed to do? This is ChatGPT. Remember them? You've heard that name before. They already agreed months earlier that if someone asks them or their tool an elections-related question, they're going to direct the user to a nonpartisan, nonprofit website that will answer their questions. And we recommended that they do the same. So we didn't hear from them. Finally, a couple weeks ago, they responded. And I got to give credit where it's due. That we were really disappointed, and I'd say even angry by their initial response and their kind of laid-back attitude about all this. They did change, and they made the exact change that we, the Secretaries of State, urged them to do. So now if you go on that same tool and you ask an elections-related question, what is the law on whatever? Or I live in Minnesota, am I eligible to vote? Or I live in Minnesota, what's the rule on voting from home? Or something like that. It's not going to try to answer, it's going to direct people to a nonpartisan, nonprofit website that will give them the answer. So that's a good thing. It's a real victory, and I got to give them credit. We were mad at them at first, but they ultimately did the right thing. All that goes to show is sometimes you got to push people. And they will and they can, or at least they should do the right thing. And our thought at the time was, just to share this with you, the Secretaries of State, we were like, look, this particular mistake was not very high stakes, right? If a particular voter misunderstood the law about who can and can't be on the ballot, that's probably unlikely to lead to any voter being disenfranchised, right? They misunderstand something, but they're not going to not vote because of that. But our worry is if we didn't speak up loudly and early and draw attention to this now, what happens a month from now or 6 weeks from now? What if the next time, or the next mistake this tool makes is, am I eligible to vote? Or where's my polling place? Or how late in the evening can I vote? Or something that's a lot higher stakes. So that's why we wanted to sort of yell loudly and publicly about this. And in this case, it really worked out. And they did the very thing, the very specific thing that we wanted to do. All that is to say, half the battle, at least from where I stand, is often just getting that basic information to people. Basic stuff. What are the hours? Where's my polling place? Can I vote from home? I've got to re-register to vote because I had a name change or I moved. Where do I do that? How do I do that? Just the basics. Just the basics. So the more we can get people on the right page or on the same page in terms of that information, the better. And that's one of the ways that we can push back against not just this or that actor or company, but like disinformation and misinformation generally. By the way, the other thing we can do is double down on working with each other. I mean, I told you, we don't count votes. This election stuff is a team sport. Our equal partners and teammates are counties, cities, townships, they're the ones on the front lines. They're counting the votes. They're hiring and training and paying the election judges. By the way, who in this room has ever, even one time a long time ago, who in this room has ever been an election judge in Minnesota? Ever. Wow. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. Seriously. Man, we need you. Sorry, this is a little detour, but it takes 30,000 election judges. 30,000. That's a small army to put on an election in Minnesota. We've got to have people who stand up and step up and do that job. And so everywhere I go, I try to plug that as an opportunity, including high schools. And one way to get more people is to sort of replenish the pool, go to some newer voters or would-be voters, not even voters yet. You can do that job in Minnesota as of age 16, by the way, just to let you know. So if you've got a high school student in your life somewhere, let them know that, and let them know that it's paid, by the way. It's not a volunteer job, as those of you who don't know. It's paid. You even get paid for the 2 hours of mandatory training. That's paid too. They got to let you off of school under state law. They got to let you off of work under state law. Have I mentioned that it's paid? It is paid. It's music to a high school student's ears. Might look good on an application or a resume. Anyway, that's a detour. But the point is, we got to double down and triple down on communication up, down, and sideways. Whether it's between our office, counties, cities, townships, and our federal partners, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, they've been wonderful in the last few years. In terms of security, both physical security, cyber security, getting at some of the mis and disinformation, particularly when it's driven by foreign governments, which it often is, where they're trying to introduce and inject into our conversations stuff that's going to pit us against one another and cause fights and cause friction. They've gotten pretty good at that, and so that's where the federal partners come in. That's another thing that we can do. And then a third thing, in terms of pushing back against or beating back this and disinformation, is just trying to be as transparent as we can. Look, a lot of you probably know, especially you who have been election judges, if everybody knew all the checks and balances and assurances we have built into our system before, during, and after the election, the way you election judges know, because you've been there on the front lines, there would be even more confidence than we have now in our election system. It's when people don't know about those things. So my philosophy is invite people in. So much of this stuff is public. People just don't know about it. They don't know that it's a totally public thing for anyone off the street. You don't have to be a big shot. You don't have to be a VIP or have an engraved invitation. We have a system in Minnesota where all the elections equipment is tested before the election. Anyone you know in your life who's skeptical, if not hostile, about elections equipment, all those things change votes, and they change votes from candidate A to candidate B. Tell them to come to one of the local equipment tests. They're called public accuracy tests. Everyone's got to do them before every election. Log on in. Watch the election folks try to trick these machines. That's what they do during these tests. They'll crease the ballot, they'll put straight marks on it, they'll circle where they're supposed to be filling in the oval, they'll overvote and undervote, and only if the stuff performs perfectly will it be allowed for use in the next election. Come on in, the water's warm. See for yourself. Or after the election, on the other end of the process, we've got mandatory audits and reviews in all 87 counties. And then after that, there's a second layer of review that our office does, where we check the checkers to make sure everything adds up, that the math is good, that everything's reconciled. All of it's open to the public. It's not behind closed doors, it's not behind a curtain. Everyone go in. I know, look, people have lives and jobs and families. They're not going to necessarily take a half day off of work to go to this stuff. But my point is just letting them know it's a thing. Letting them know it even exists. And that ought to inspire even more confidence than we already have, at least in my book. So, look, I'm an optimist about this stuff. I'm a long-term optimist, I should say. In the short term and the medium term, yeah, we have issues, we have problems, we have challenges. But look, I think we're in good shape as a country in the long term, and we're in really good shape in Minnesota in the long term. Does democracy sometimes feel a little bit dinged and dented these last few years? I'd say yes, but nowhere close to defeated. Nowhere close. And we've got a lot that we can hold on to and be proud of, particularly here in Minnesota. And so, look, the next 60 days, yeah, they're going to be intense. There are going to be strong feelings, and maybe some hurt feelings. But as long as we can get those two things that I wish for, high turnout and low drama, I think we're going to be in good shape. That's not to say nothing could go wrong. Of course it could. But as I can sit here from 60 days out, I'm much more of an optimist than I am a pessimist. Like anything in life, anything you do, I do, any of us do, we always try to, hope for the best, plan for the worst, right? We're no different. That's what we're doing too. But in the end, if you want my prediction as of day minus 60, is we're going to be in good shape if we can get those two things, high turnout and low drama. So I want to hand it over to you. I want to thank you for your time, for your attention, for your interest, and I really want to thank you for being great partners in the democracy business. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I think you're moderating, but I'll take questions. I'll also take answers. Maybe you have an answer, not a question. Maybe you have advice. Maybe you have pushback or criticism. I promise my tender feelings will not be hurt. If you've got some criticism, that's okay too. I'll take it all.
Hi, I'm Deb Benton from Marshall. And my question is, I know you've talked to a lot of young people at these schools. Do you have a feeling for whether they are less susceptible to misinformation and disinformation than the old folks who didn't have to deal with that so much?
That's such a great question. Are young people less? I mean, on the one hand, they're plugged into so many more sources, right? I mean, they're on their phones, they've got a million apps, so there's that. On the other hand, they're hearing, not just from me, but from teachers and others, more than maybe some of the rest of us were at their same ages about, hey, just beware what you consume, right? Back when it was 3 TV networks and, a few newspapers and whatever, and they were the sort of the point of the funnel, funneling all this news, it was maybe a little easier. But now with thousands of sources, and everyone with a phone is a journalist now, right? You don't have to go to journalism school. That's it, you're a journalist. You just type what you think, or what you found, or what you think you found, and that's it. You can get a ton of followers and all the rest. So I would say that there's more opportunities for them to be influenced, especially by those who are targeting them for influence on elections issue or any other issue. But they are being exposed to more appeals, let's say, from teachers and others to be wary and be skeptical, right? Don't just believe everything in your social media feed. Ask tough questions. View it with a little bit of skepticism, right? Double check it. Is this the only source saying it, or are there 2 or 3 others that maybe you trust or other people trust that are saying it? So it's kind of two sides of the coin there. More opportunities to influence them in a bad way, but yet they're getting the kind of, I guess, training, you might say, or the sort of warnings that maybe some of the rest of us didn't, just because we didn't have all those sources. So I think it's a mixed bag, in my opinion.
I used to work in the county system, so I got to know a little bit of the behind-the-scenes operations, et cetera. And one of the things I would like you to address is, you said election workers get paid, we have tons of equipment we have to purchase, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit about the financing that goes into elections and where that comes from?
Great question. Money question. How do we pay for all this stuff? Elections can be expensive. The elections equipment is expensive. Hiring, training, and paying the election judges is expensive. Even maintaining a particular polling place with all the requirements for access, that can be expensive. So who's paying for all this stuff? Well, until maybe a decade or so ago, it was really on the local governments almost entirely. So it was on property taxpayers, basically. It was counties, it was cities, and it was townships. But that is really starting to change. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that, which I think are really good examples. And both examples, I'm a little biased because of things that our office pushed for and got. So one is, I think, a real landmark was this. If you all remember, up until 2016, we didn't have a presidential primary, we had caucuses and party conventions that chose the delegates that went to the national convention and nominated candidates, right? But after the 2016 election, the system was just sort of overwhelmed by the enthusiasm on both sides, right? It was an open presidential seat. President Obama was ineligible to run. Real enthusiasm on the Democratic side, real enthusiasm on the Republican side, but it was overwhelming in many places. So the legislature decided enough of this. For presidential stuff, we're going to have a 3rd statewide election every 4 years, and we're going to have an after presidential primary. But that's asking a lot of county folks, city folks, township folks. You're telling them once every 4 years, you're responsible for running not 2 statewide elections, but 3. It's expensive. So one of the things we pushed for and got was the state agreed that for this presidential nominating primary, it would reimburse counties for the cost and cities and townships for the cost. We're the ones who administer the reimbursement. So it all gets sort of funneled through our office. And we have to look, we gotta have receipts, and they got to show what their expenses were, but we then reimburse. And that's set, I think, a good precedent. That had never been done in modern history, to my knowledge, which is the state acknowledging that, look, now when we do new election stuff, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost your local property taxpayers. So here we're going to offset the cost, or in this case, largely, completely reimburse. It doesn't reimburse for 100%, and you can't reimburse for hassle, right? That's not a line item on any reimbursement form, but you can reimburse for the big stuff, the costs of the equipment and the election judges and so forth. And the other thing that we just got done last year in the legislative session was this. We wanted to create an account in the state government. We call it the voter fund. That is just what it sounds like. It's just an account meant to help to defray the costs of running elections. It's not a buyout, and I've not heard any county or city or township say they want a buyout, and that would be too expensive anyway. But let's start an account in the state government. They can at least throw a few bucks the way of counties, cities, and townships to defray, even if it's just by a percentage points. And we did that. And so, look, I'd like to see some more zeros on that number. Right now, there's $5 million in that account. It's not a ton. You divide that by 87 counties, that's not a fortune. But it is something. And we hope that number will grow and we'll be able to get more money out, even separate from that presidential nominating primary, just for everyday elections. It will help, just help, defray the costs. Because this stuff is expensive, and it shouldn't just be a local responsibility. We're all in this together.
Any more questions?
Criticism.
What is set up for to react to disinformation? For example, there's a deep fake of you saying, "Oh, Granite Falls, the machine broke down. I'm in tomorrow." Okay, is there anything being done to stop that as it's happening?
Yep. So, great question. What do we do? Are we just talking about the problem, or let me talk about two things. One is more a legal thing, and one is more just a human thing. The legal thing is that Minnesota last year passed a law that bans deepfake audio and video images within 90 days of an election. If two things are true, both of these got to be true. First, it's done without the permission of the person depicted. So, your example, I never gave anyone permission to doctor up a video. If I did, that would be separate. But if I didn't, so that's number one. And number two is, it's done for the purpose of influencing the outcome of an election. And that's meant to guard against stuff like parody, comedy. You know, Saturday Night Live, I use this example, does a sketch with a fake Biden or a fake Harris or a fake Trump or whatever. Obviously, doesn't hold the law. So, this is a new law that puts teeth in the law, provides more tools, so that anyone who sees one of these things can go to a court, wave the statute over the ground, and get a court order to take that stuff down. Now, of course, that doesn't cover everything, right? Sometimes you can't find the person who's put it up. So sure, you can get a court order. Who's going to get the court order, right? But at least that's a start. That's number one. Number two, fortunately, we have, or unfortunately, yes, we have a recent example of what to do just on a human level. Some of you remember in the New Hampshire presidential primary just last February, we had an example of this in the state of New Hampshire. Somebody, somewhere, put out a fake Joe Biden robocall, meaning one of those automatic phone messages that you get. It's totally fake, manufactured, synthetic. The voice, supposedly the voice of President Biden saying something or urging something, whatever, is totally phony. And my counterpart, the Secretary of State of New Hampshire, did a fantastic job. He jumped right in, joined with his Attorney General. They got it taken down, they got a court order, and then they did the next step, which is they just, to anyone who would listen, broadcast throughout the state, and the media was really cooperative in this. Hey, if you got this robocall, this is false. And they did it, within a 24-hour period. So the word spread that, no, this is not real, this is not really this person. And that's tough to measure, right? But it is an example of what can be done if people cooperate. So between sort of the human element of just cooperating and communicating with one another and passing laws that at least help in many cases, maybe not all, but many curb this stuff, I think we're onto something. I hope we are.
All right.
We hear a lot about voter purging in a lot of states. How is that process carried out in Minnesota?
Yeah, voter purging. Well, we don't purge in Minnesota. Every state in the country, under federal law has a responsibility to, this is a bureaucratic sounding term, but we all must do what they call list maintenance, which is what it sounds like. You gotta make sure, of course, you've gotta make sure that only people who are supposed to be on the voter rolls are. So you want ineligible voters, you want deceased voters, you want people off the list. Of course we do that. But in Minnesota, at least, we do not purge. Meaning we don't, unless you're someone who is clearly ineligible, of course, we get them on the voter rolls. But purging in other states has meant more than just getting rid of people who are ineligible. Of course, if someone's deceased, they're off the rolls. Of course, if you discover that somebody is 17 and not 18 and they somehow got on there, yes, they're off the rolls. But we're different in this way. In other states, there have been voters who don't vote for a while, and they are completely purged. They are completely zeroed out in the system. We don't do that. If you don't vote for 4 years in Minnesota, you are moved to inactive status. That's what's under our law, inactive status. And it's super easy to get back on active status. You got to do something or show something or go to an election office, and you can do that on game day in your polling place. That's fine too. But we don't purge, meaning we don't permanently delete someone just because they haven't voted in a while. Other states do, we do not.
All right. Seeing no one else approaching the microphone, I think you're going to be sticking around for a little bit to chat with other folks. All right. Well, I have one final question. All right. So we've talked about all the great work that you're doing, all the great reforms that have been made in the last couple of years. Looking to the future, past 2024's election, is there a reform that you think state policy, or that should be made into state policy, that you'd really like to see to continue to improve Minnesota elections?
There are a lot, I would say. We're never fully done, right? It's always a process of continuous self-improvement, we hope. So there are a number of things we've been talking about for 2025 and 2026. Everything from, there's a lot we can do to improve voting access on tribal lands. That's one thing. Another thing we can do is strengthen even further what we do after the election in terms of the look back and post-election audits and reviews. That's another one. There's been talk about doing in Minnesota something that a number of other states have done, which is do a comprehensive election guide from the Secretary of State's office. One of the things I hear a lot, especially from younger people, is this idea of, look, and maybe you know someone like this, I've seen a lot in my business to high schools and colleges. They'll say something like, of course I have an opinion for President of the United States. Who doesn't, right? It's everywhere, it's very prominent, whatever, but I have a tough time forming an opinion on some of the other races on the ballot because I can't even get information about it. I don't know who, and some young people will say, boy, I'm not even sure what the job of county commissioner is, let alone who these 7 people are, and it's really hard to find information. So other states have experimented with just we would obviously not editorialize, but just a space, even on our website, where in their own words, candidates or offices could say who they are and what they intend to do or what they believe. And this has worked out well in some other states. We're trying to figure out the logistics, but that would get at a problem that I see a lot, which is particularly younger people of all ages saying, I just can't get information about school. I just cannot for the life of me find information about county commissioner or judges or whatever. And in some cases, too many, young people in particular, turn away from voting altogether. I can't tell you the number of times when I go and talk to young audiences, when I'll hear something like that, people will say, look, here's why I didn't vote in the last election. Not because I don't know it's important, not because I didn't know the rules, not because I didn't know where to go. I didn't vote because I only had an opinion on like 3 of these contests, and there were like 20-something on my ballot. And I felt I would be doing a disservice by going in there and just sort of throwing darts at a dartboard or voting for the coolest sounding name or the best looking lawn sign or whatever, and that didn't seem right. So I just thought I'd stay away altogether. And my response to that is, first, you can seek out information about those other offices. But the other thing I always say, this is a little far away from the question, but the other thing I always say is, look, my response to you is, if it's a question between you not voting at all or going in and voting for less than 100% of the contest, that's a no-brainer for me. Go in and vote for the 3, or the 5, or the 7, or the 1, or the 12, or whatever it is, and leave the rest blank. They don't know this, but I tell them, your ballot is not spoiled. A lot of them think that too. They say, oh, I thought if you didn't fill everything out, none of it would be counted. No. Go in, vote for the stuff you know. Don't feel the least bit of shame or guilt about it. There is no tattoo on your forehead telling the world that you didn't vote for 100% of the contest. It's a completely secret ballot. And you know what? Someday you will care about county commissioner and judge. But now at age 19 or 23 or 27 or whatever, don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. Don't beat yourself up. Vote for what you know for now. The rest will come in other elections, and don't worry about it. But if we could play a role in getting some information to folks, in other candidates' words, we would be hands off of the content. That might be something that we want to do. So I just want to highlight that one because I see it over and over again, particularly with young people or people of all ages saying, where do I get info on some of these other contests?